I never thought silence could feel heavier than shouting until the morning. My son looked me in the eye and said taking the bus would build character and save money. And I nodded because that is what fathers do when they are trying to keep peace after loss, and grief have already taken enough from the family. I stood at the stop with my hands in my coat pockets watching cars pass and telling myself this was temporary, that loyalty still meant something. Then, weeks later, a photo appeared online, bright and smiling. My son standing beside a brand new BMW keys raised like a trophy, his wife beaming, and the caption said, "Family deserves the best." And in that moment, something inside me cracked, not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. I remembered every time I swallowed my pride, every bill I paid quietly, every sacrifice framed as responsibility while I was slowly pushed aside. The betrayal was not just the car, it was the message. It was the public celebration of my exclusion, the quiet humiliation dressed up as values. I didn't comment. I didn't argue. I did not ask for explanations because I already understood exactly where I stood. Instead, I sat down alone in my kitchen, the house too quiet, the memories too loud, and I made one call. A call I had promised myself I would never need to make. That call would change everything because there are truths families try to bury and boundaries they never expect a father to enforce. If you stay with me, you will see how patience turns into resolve, how loyalty finds its limits, and how the people who thought they were untouchable discovered that respect once lost is never free to get back. My name is Thomas Caldwell. I'm 68 years old, a retired accountant who spent 40 years helping small businesses keep their books straight and their futures secure. I lost my wife Eleanor 2 years ago to cancer, and since then I've been living with my son Ryan and his wife Vanessa in their house on Maple Drive, a decision that seemed kind at the time but has slowly revealed itself to be something else entirely. The number 47 bus smells like diesel and old upholstery. I've memorized that smell over the past 2 years, the way you memorize anything that becomes routine. Every Tuesday and Thursday, I take this bus to Dr. Patterson's office for my blood pressure checkups appointments that Ryan used to drive me to back when Eleanor was alive. Back when things were different. There are 2 cars in our driveway, Ryan's silver sedan and Vanessa's white SUV. Both sit there most mornings gleaming in the Colorado sun while I walk 3 blocks to the bus stop with my cane and my dignity. I tell myself it's to save money for the family. That's what Vanessa says anyway. Every little bit helps, Dad. We're all making sacrifices. She smiles when she says it. That polished smile she wears like armor, and I nod, because nodding is easier than arguing. The truth is simpler and uglier. Vanessa controls the car schedule the way she controls everything else in that house. She decides who goes where and when, and somehow, there's never room in the schedule for my doctor's appointments. Never time to drop Dad off on the way to yoga or brunch or whatever fills her calendar these days. I watch the street slide past the window and I see them other seniors my age being helped out of cars by their children, walk to doors treated like they matter. A woman about my age steps carefully onto the sidewalk while her daughter holds her elbow, both of them laughing at something I can't hear. I look away. Envy is an ugly emotion, and I've tried to keep ugly emotions out of my heart since Eleanor passed. But sometimes they creep in anyway, like water through cracks in old concrete. When Eleanor died, Ryan and Vanessa insisted I move in with them. "You shouldn't be alone, Dad," Ryan said, and his eyes were wet, and I believed him. I sold the house Eleanor and I had lived in for 35 years, the house where we raised Ryan, where we built our life, and I moved into their guest room with 2 suitcases and a box of photo albums. I thought I was joining a family. Instead, I became a tenant who pays more than his share. I cover the groceries now, the utilities too. Most of the household expenses come out of my retirement savings funds Eleanor and I spent decades building for our golden years. Vanessa calls it contributing to the family budget. She has a gift for making extraction sound like participation. Eleanor would have seen through her from the beginning. My wife had a way of reading people that I never quite mastered. I remember one of the last conversations we had a few weeks before the cancer took her voice entirely. She squeezed my hand and said, "Some people only reveal their true face when they think you can't see Thomas. Remember that." I didn't understand what she meant then. I think I'm beginning to understand now. The bus lurches to a stop at a red light, and I notice small things the way I've trained myself to notice them. How Ryan avoids eye contact with me whenever Vanessa is speaking. How our family budget meetings always end with me writing another check. How Vanessa's smile never quite reaches her eyes when she looks at me, though it blazes like a spotlight when her friends come over. I don't react to these things. I don't argue or complain. I simply observe the way I observed columns of numbers for 40 years, waiting for the pattern to emerge, waiting for the ledger to tell its story. A car glides past the bus window, sleek and black, catching the morning light like a promise. A BMW. The exact model Vanessa has been mentioning for months at dinner, in phone calls with her mother, in those budget meetings, where she explains why we all need to tighten our belts. I watch it disappear down the street, and something quiet settles in my chest. Not anger, not yet. Just a knowing, the kind that comes when numbers finally add up to a sum you suspected all along. The bus groans forward, carrying me toward my appointment, and I wonder how long the pattern will hold before it breaks. Dr. Patterson tells me my blood pressure is slightly elevated, which is medical language for you're carrying too much stress, and we both know why. I nod, accept the prescription adjustment, and take the bus home without mentioning that stress has become the architecture of my daily life. Some things you don't tell doctors, some things you barely tell yourself. The house is empty when I return. Ryan is at work, and Vanessa's SUV is gone yoga probably, or lunch with her mother. I pour myself a glass of water and sit in the kitchen listening to the silence, and my mind drifts backward the way it often does now. 3 years. That's how long I've been living this arithmetic of slow disappearance. I remember the newspaper first. I'd subscribed to the Denver Post for over 40 years, a ritual Eleanor and I shared every morning over coffee. 2 months after I moved in, Vanessa mentioned casually that print newspapers were such a waste and terrible for the environment. She smiled when she said it. She always smiles. I canceled the subscription the next day, telling myself it was a small thing, a reasonable adjustment for the family. Then the fishing trip. Every September for 23 years, I drove up to Lake Granby with my old friend Bill Morrison. We'd rent the same cabin, catch nothing worth keeping, and spend 3 days talking about everything and nothing. Last year, Vanessa reminded me that September was tight financially, something about property taxes coming due. "Maybe next year, Dad," she said, patting my shoulder. I called Bill and made excuses. He understood, or pretended to. We haven't spoken since. I think he stopped believing my excuses before I did. The jacket is the smallest thing, but somehow it's the one that stings most. I've worn the same brown corduroy jacket for 3 winters now, the elbows worn thin, the lining starting to separate. Eleanor bought it for me 15 years ago, so part of me doesn't want to replace it. But the other part, the honest part, knows I haven't bought a new jacket because every dollar I have seems to flow outward toward grocery bills and utility payments and endless family expenses that never quite get explained. Each time Vanessa frames it the same way, temporary, necessary, for the family. Each time Ryan says nothing. He looks at his plate or his phone or the middle distance where uncomfortable truths can be safely ignored. His silence has become its own language, one I've learned to read fluently. It says, "I know this is wrong, but I won't say so." It says, "I love you, Dad, but not enough to fight for you." I've stopped expecting him to speak. Expectations are just disappointments waiting to happen. Last Thanksgiving stands out in my memory like a bruise that won't fade. I offered to pay for the dinner, a genuine offer made from genuine love. I wanted to contribute something meaningful, to feel like part of the family instead of just a source of funds. Vanessa's face lit up. "That's so generous, Dad," she said, squeezing my arm. "We'll keep it simple, I promise." She ordered catering for 40 people. We had 14 guests. I saw the charge on my credit card statement 2 weeks later, $2,147.83. When I mentioned it carefully, diplomatically, the way you mention things to people who hold power over your daily comfort, Vanessa laughed like I'd told a joke. "Family is worth it, isn't it?" she said. And what could I say to that? What argument exists against family? So I paid the bill and added another entry to the ledger. I'd started keeping the one no one knows about. The ledger sits in my nightstand drawer, a small black notebook that looks like nothing important. It's not a diary. I've never been the type for diaries, for feelings poured onto pages. This is something else. This is accounting. Dates, amounts, patterns. Entry number 147, written just last week, reads, V mentioned car fund again. R silent as usual. Pattern consistent. I don't know why I started keeping it. Maybe because numbers have always made sense to me when people didn't. Maybe because Eleanor told me to pay attention. Eleanor. Even now, 2 years gone, she visits me in memories so vivid I sometimes forget she's not here. I remember the hospital those final weeks when the cancer had stolen her voice, but not her clarity. She squeezed my hand with surprising strength and said, "I've made arrangements with Caleb. When the time comes, and it will come, trust him." Caleb Whitmore, our attorney for 30 years, one of the few people Eleanor trusted completely. I asked her what she meant, but she just shook her head, exhausted, and closed her eyes. I didn't understand then. I filed it away as the ramblings of a dying woman, words spoken through a haze of morphine and grief. I'm beginning to understand now. Eleanor saw things I refused to see. She prepared for possibilities I couldn't imagine. And somewhere in Caleb's office, there are arrangements waiting for a time she predicted, and I'm only now beginning to recognize. My phone buzzes on the kitchen table, pulling me out of memory and back into the present. A Facebook notification. I don't use Facebook much. Eleanor was the one who kept up with social media, but I check it occasionally to see pictures of old friends' grandchildren updates from people I used to know. This notification is different. It's from Vanessa. She's posted something new. I open the app and my hands go still. The screen glows in the quiet kitchen, and for a moment, I forget how to breathe. A black BMW sits in a driveway I don't recognize, gleaming like it just rolled off the showroom floor. The same model I watched glide past the bus window this morning. The same car Vanessa has been mentioning for months, always in the context of someday and when we can afford it and family goals. But this isn't someday. This is today, and the car isn't in our driveway. Vanessa stands beside it, radiant in a red dress I've never seen before, her smile wide enough to show every tooth. Next to her, with one hand resting proudly on the hood, is Frank Miller, her father. A man I've met exactly 4 times in 3 years at holidays, where he ate my food and drank my wine and never once looked me in the eye. The caption reads, "Family deserves the best. Finally got dad the car he's always dreamed of. #blessed life, #family first." 847 likes, 132 comments. I scroll through them slowly, each one a small knife. Vanessa, you're such an amazing daughter. Frank is so lucky to have you. This is what family is all about. Beautiful. Goals. Wish my kids loved me this much. I read every comment. I count them. 132 people who believe Vanessa Miller Lawson is a devoted daughter, a generous soul, a woman who puts family first. 132 people who have no idea that the money for this car came from someone else's family entirely. My mind does what it has always done. It calculates. 3 years of family savings. My $12,000 in grocery bills I covered because times are tight. Utility payments that somehow became my responsibility after the first winter. The fishing trips I canceled, the newspaper I gave up, the new jacket I never bought, the hearing aid I decided I didn't really need because Vanessa mentioned how expensive medical equipment was and how we all had to prioritize. I switched my blood pressure medication to generics last year. The brand name worked better, but the generic saved $40 a month, and Vanessa had been talking about how the household budget was stretched thin. $40 a month for 12 months, $480, enough for maybe one of that BMW's monthly payments. I added up in my head the way I've added up numbers my entire professional life. Conservative estimate, I've contributed over $60,000 to this household in 3 years. Not rent. I was told they didn't need to pay rent, that family doesn't charge family. Just contributions, just helping out, just temporary arrangements that somehow became permanent while no one was watching. $60,000, and Frank Miller drives a BMW. I scroll down further past the congratulations and the heart emojis, and I find the comment that stops my heart. Ryan Lawson. You deserve it, babe. Love seeing you take care of family. I read it 3 times. Then a 4th, my son. My only child. The boy I taught to ride a bicycle, the young man I walked down the aisle of his college graduation, the husband I welcomed into my home when his wife suggested I shouldn't live alone. My son celebrating the transfer of his father's savings to his father-in-law. He knew. He must have known. You don't buy a car in secret. You don't plan a gift this size without discussions, without budgets, without looking at where the money will come from. Ryan sat at those budget meetings. Ryan heard Vanessa talk about the car fund. Ryan watched me cancel trips and switch medications and wear the same worn jacket year after year. And he said nothing, did nothing, just typed, "You deserve it, babe," and hit post. I wait for the anger to come. It should come, shouldn't it? A normal person would feel rage, would want to storm into the living room and demand explanations, would raise his voice for the first time in years. But the anger doesn't come. What comes instead is something colder, something Eleanor would recognize. Clarity. I take a screenshot of the post, then the comments, then Ryan's response. I save each one in a folder on my phone, a folder I created 8 months ago when I first started to see the pattern clearly. The folder has a boring name, Medical Records, because no one ever looks at folders with boring names. Inside are photographs of receipts, screenshots of text messages, scanned copies of credit card statements. Evidence. Eleanor taught me this. Not directly, not in words, but in the way she lived. She was a woman who believed in documentation and paper trails and the power of records to tell truths that people try to hide. Emotions are valid, she told me once when I was upset about a client who'd lied about his expenses. But evidence is power. Feel what you need to feel. Thomas. Then write it down. I feel what I need to feel. The betrayal, the humiliation, the slow grinding grief of realizing that my son has chosen sides and he didn't choose mine. I let it wash through me, acknowledge it, give it space to exist. Then I write it down. I close Facebook and open my notebook, the black ledger in my nightstand drawer. I turn to a fresh page and I write in my careful accountant's hand the penmanship I've used for 40 years. Entry number 152, pattern confirmed, evidence sufficient, time to call Caleb. I sleep poorly that night, my mind turning the numbers over like stones in a riverbed. $60,000, a BMW. My son's comment glowing in the dark behind my eyelids. When morning comes, I feel older than my 68 years, as if betrayal has its own weight that settles into bones and joints. The mailbox gives me a reason to step outside to breathe air that doesn't smell like Vanessa's expensive candles. I'm halfway down the driveway when I hear her voice. "Thomas, good morning." Martha Peterson stands at the edge of her lawn, pruning shears in hand, her silver hair bright in the morning sun. She's 72, widowed like me, a kind woman who brings cookies at Christmas and waves whenever she sees me waiting for the bus. I've always liked Martha. Right now I wish I hadn't seen her. "I saw Vanessa's post last night," she says, beaming. "Your son-in-law must be absolutely thrilled about that new car, so generous of your family." She says it with such warmth, such genuine admiration that I understand immediately she thinks this is something to celebrate. She thinks I'm part of this generosity. She has no idea that the gift she's praising was purchased with my sacrifice. I open my mouth to respond, but no words come. What would I say? The truth would sound like bitterness, like a petty old man complaining about his children. The lie would taste like ash. So I just nod, force something that might pass for a smile, and mumble about needing to check the mail. Martha's cheerful voice follows me back toward the house. "You must be so proud of them." The humiliation I felt last night was private, contained within the walls of my own heart. This is different. This is public. The whole neighborhood saw that post, drew their conclusions, formed their opinions. To everyone on Maple Drive, Vanessa is a devoted daughter, and I'm a lucky man to be part of such a loving family. The narrative has been written without my consent, and I'm cast in a role I never auditioned for. The afternoon brings Frank Miller himself, arriving in full triumph. The BMW pulls into our driveway with the self-satisfied purr of expensive engineering, and Frank emerges like a king, surveying his kingdom. He's 70 years old, thick around the middle, with the permanent tan of a man who plays golf more often than he works. I've never warmed to him. Now I understand why. "Thomas." He waves me over with the enthusiasm of someone who has never considered that his good fortune might be another man's loss. "Come see this beauty." I stand in my own driveway on concrete. I helped pay to resurface last summer, and I watch Frank Miller run his hands over the hood of a car funded by my retirement savings. He shows me the features with childlike delight, the leather interior, the navigation system, the way the engine sounds when he revs it, 20 minutes of show and tell, and not once does he wonder how his daughter afforded such a gift. "Vanessa really came through," he says, patting the hood like it's a beloved pet. "You raised a good son, Thomas. He picked a winner." I say nothing. There is nothing to say. The words would choke me if I tried. Dinner that evening is roasted chicken prepared by Vanessa with her usual precision. She's a good cook, I'll give her that. She's good at many things that don't require a conscience. "Dad, you should really get out more," she says, passing me the salad bowl. Her voice is sweet, concerned, the voice of a caring daughter-in-law. "All this sitting around isn't healthy. Maybe take up a hobby. Join a club." She tilts her head and her smile doesn't reach her eyes. "You seem so isolated lately." I hear what she's really saying. "You're useless. You're old. You're in the way." Ryan stares at his plate, moving food around with his fork, contributing nothing to the conversation. His silence is louder than any words. I wonder when he stopped being my son and became simply her husband, whether there was a specific moment or just a slow erosion I failed to notice. That night, after the house goes quiet, I do something I've avoided for 2 years. I open the bottom drawer of my dresser. Eleanor's drawer, the one where I kept her things after she passed because I couldn't bear to sort through them. Her scarves still smell faintly of her perfume lavender, and something softer that I could never identify. I run my fingers over the silk, remembering how she wore them, how she laughed, how she saw through people in ways I never could. Beneath the scarves, my fingers touch something hard and rectangular. I pull it out and my heart stops. A USB drive. Small, ordinary, the kind you can buy anywhere. But the label isn't ordinary at all. It's written in Eleanor's careful script, the handwriting I'd recognize anywhere. Open when she crosses the line. E. I stare at it for a long time, turning it over in my palm. Eleanor knew. 2 years before her death, or maybe longer, she knew what Vanessa was. She prepared for this moment, this exact moment, when the line would be crossed and I would need something more than patience. I don't open it. Not yet. I need to understand the full picture, first need to know what Eleanor saw and what she planned. There's only one person who can tell me that. I pick up my phone and dial a number I haven't called in 2 years. It rings twice before a familiar voice answers, calm and unsurprised, as if he's been sitting by the phone waiting for exactly this moment. "Thomas, I've been expecting this call." Caleb's voice on the phone is exactly as I remember it, measured calm, carrying the weight of someone who has spent a lifetime listening to secrets. Our conversation is brief. He tells me to gather my thoughts, to look through what I have, and to call him back when the house is quiet. "Some conversations require darkness," he says. "They're easier to have when the rest of the world is asleep." So I wait. 3 a.m. finds me at the kitchen table, the only light coming from the small lamp above the stove. The house breathes around me, that particular silence of sleeping people, of secrets kept behind closed doors. My notebook lies open before me, and I do something I've never done. I read it from the beginning. Entry number 1, dated 3 years ago. 2 weeks after I moved in, V suggested I cancel newspaper, said it was wasteful. R agreed. Entry number 15. Paid electric bill. V said it was just this once. 3rd time. Entry 47. V mentioned fishing trip cost, subtle but clear, canceled reservation. Entry 83. Thanksgiving catering, expected $400, actual charge $2, $147. V laughed when I asked. 207 entries, 3 years of financial manipulation, emotional dismissal, systematic isolation. Documented in my accountant's hand, precise and unemotional. Each one, a small brick in a wall I didn't realize I was building until I stepped back to see its shape. I read them not with anger that would be easy, and easy emotions cloud judgment. I read them with clarity. This is not paranoia. This is pattern recognition. This is what 40 years of analyzing numbers has trained me to see, the story that data tells when you arrange it properly. And the story my data tells is simple and damning. I have been methodically exploited by people I trusted, and my son has watched it happen without lifting a finger to stop it. The notebook isn't enough, though. It's my word against theirs, the ramblings of an old man who might be confused, bitter, losing his grip. I need something more. I need whatever Eleanor left for me. Her address book sits in the same nightstand drawer where I found the USB, leather-bound, worn soft with years of use. Eleanor was old-fashioned about some things. She never fully trusted phones to remember what she might need. I turned to the page marked W, and there it is. Caleb Whitmore's name, his office number, his home number. But it's the notes beneath that stop my breath. In Eleanor's careful script, When you're ready, Thomas, not before. And below that, in smaller letters, as if she'd added it later perhaps in the hospital, perhaps in those final weeks when she knew time was running out. The trust protects you. Caleb will explain. The trust. Our family trust, the one we set up decades ago, the one I assumed was simply about inheritance and taxes, Eleanor saw further than I did. She always did. I dial Caleb's number. He answers on the first ring as if his hand was already on the phone waiting. I found her address book, I say. And the USB, Caleb, what did Eleanor do? There's a pause, the kind that holds weight, and then he speaks. Eleanor came to me 5 years ago, Thomas, before she got sick, before any of this. She saw something in Vanessa early on, something in the way she looked at your house, your savings, your life. Eleanor didn't want to interfere with Ryan's happiness. She hoped she was wrong, but she wanted to protect you in case she wasn't. 5 years. Eleanor saw through Vanessa 5 years ago, and she said nothing to me. She let me make my own observations, draw my own conclusions. She trusted me to see the truth eventually. We built a protocol together, Caleb continues, a living trust with an elder protection provision. It's legal, it's enforceable, and it's been waiting for exactly this moment. The trust specifies that any beneficiary who engages in financial exploitation or emotional abuse of you, documented and provable, forfeits their inheritance entirely. I let this sink in. My wife, from her hospital bed, from the grave itself, reached forward through time to shield me from harm I hadn't yet recognized. And the USB, I ask. Caleb's voice softens, becomes almost tender. That's Eleanor's voice, Thomas. Her testimony recorded 3 months before she passed. She knew she might not be there to speak for you, so she made sure her words would survive. It's powerful, and it's specific, and when the time comes, it will be undeniable. When the time comes, don't open it yet, Caleb says. I know that's hard. I know you want to hear her voice again, but evidence is most powerful when it answers the biggest possible accusation. Let them make one more move. The larger the transgression, the cleaner our response. If you reveal what you know now, they'll adapt, cover their tracks, claim misunderstanding. But if you wait until they overreach, and they will overreach, Thomas, people like Vanessa always do, then there's no narrative they can construct to escape the truth. I think of the BMW gleaming in my driveway, of Frank Miller patting its hood like a prize he'd won fairly, of Ryan's comment beneath the photo praising his wife for taking care of family. How will I know when they've gone far enough? You'll know, Caleb says. Trust your instincts, trust Eleanor's preparation, and trust me. We've been waiting for this, Thomas. All three of us, you, me, and Eleanor. The only ones who don't know they're being watched are the ones who think they're watching you. I'm silent for a moment, absorbing this. My wife built a fortress around me without my knowledge, and a man I haven't spoken to in 2 years has been standing guard at its gates. Caleb, I say finally, what do I do now? Nothing different. Go about your days. Document what you see. Let Vanessa believe she's winning. Confidence makes people careless, and carelessness makes people confess things they never intended to reveal. Before he hangs up, Caleb adds one final thought, his voice quiet but certain. They think they're in control, Thomas. That's exactly where we need them to be. The next morning, I tell Vanessa I have errands to run and take the bus downtown. She barely looks up from her phone, which suits me fine. The less attention she pays to my movements, the better. Caleb's office occupies the 3rd floor of an old brick building on Larimer Street, the kind of building that smells like history and leather and important decisions. I haven't been here in over 2 years, not since we finalized Eleanor's estate. The receptionist recognizes me, smiles warmly, and tells me Mr. Whitmore is expecting me. Of course he is. He's been expecting me for 3 years. The office itself hasn't changed. Walls lined with law books, their spines faded from decades of use. A mahogany desk that probably weighs more than I do. And there on the shelf behind Caleb's chair, a photograph I'd forgotten about Eleanor, Caleb, and me at his retirement party 15 years ago before he unretired because he couldn't stand the quiet. We're all laughing in the photo, caught in some joke I no longer remember. Eleanor's hand rests on my arm. She looks so alive. Caleb rises to greet me, 72 years old and still sharp as the day we met. His handshake is firm, his eyes kind but assessing. He's always been able to read people. It's what made him such a good attorney. He reads me now, sees the weight I'm carrying, and nods as if confirming something he already knew. Sit down, Thomas. We have a lot to discuss. He pulls a folder from his desk drawer, thick with documents, and places it between us. The label reads, Caldwell Protection Protocol, confidential. I stare at it, and despite everything, despite knowing this moment was coming, my throat tightens. Before we begin, Caleb says, I need to ask you something. How much do you remember about setting this up? I meet his eyes. All of it. The truth settles into the room like dust in sunlight. This wasn't Eleanor's plan alone. It was ours. 5 years ago, before the cancer. Before any of this, Eleanor came to me with observations she'd been collecting for months. The way Vanessa inventoried our house during her first visit, not admiring it, calculating it. The questions she asked about property values, retirement accounts, inheritance laws. The way she steered Ryan away from his old friends, his old hobbies, anything that might give him perspective outside her influence. She's not what she pretends to be. Eleanor said that night, sitting across from me at our kitchen table in the house I'd eventually sell to move in with my son. I don't know exactly what she is, but I know she sees us as assets, not family. I wanted to argue. Ryan loved Vanessa. She made him happy, or seemed to. What right did we have to interfere? But Eleanor wasn't talking about interference. She was talking about preparation. We won't say anything to Ryan, she said. We won't try to break them up or change his mind. That would only push him away. But we can protect you, Thomas. We can make sure that if I'm gone and she shows her true face, you won't be defenseless. So we called Caleb. The three of us spent weeks designing what he called the protection protocol, a living trust, with provisions most people never think to include. The elder protection provision was Eleanor's idea. Any beneficiary who engaged in documented financial exploitation or emotional abuse of me would automatically forfeit their inheritance. No court battle required, no he said, she said, just evidence reviewed by the trustee and consequences that couldn't be appealed. The catch was documentation. The provision required proof, and proof required time. That's why you let it happen, Caleb says now, opening the folder, spreading documents across his desk. The 3 years, the sacrifices. You weren't being victimized, Thomas. You were building a case. He's right. Every canceled fishing trip, every generic medication, every credit card charge I questioned and then quietly paid, all of it went into my notebook. Not as a diary of suffering, but as a legal record. Dates, amounts, witnesses, patterns. 207 entries, each one a brick in the foundation of evidence Eleanor knew I would need. I wasn't weak. I was waiting. The provision requires documented exploitation or abuse. Caleb continues, pulling out a page dense with legal language. What you've gathered is substantial. Financial records showing disproportionate contribution, written evidence of emotional manipulation, witness to public humiliation. But there's one more thing that would make this airtight. What power of attorney? Caleb leans back, steepling his fingers. If Vanessa pushes you to sign over legal control of your finances, which she will, Thomas, it's the logical next step for someone like her that attempt alone constitutes undue influence under Colorado law. Combined with everything else, it triggers the provision automatically. I think of Vanessa's smile at dinner, her suggestions that I'm getting forgetful, her gentle reminders that family should take care of family. She's been laying groundwork for weeks, maybe months. She doesn't know she's building her own trap. So I wait, I say. You wait. You let her make her move. Confidence makes people careless, and Vanessa is very confident right now. She thinks the BMW was a triumph. She doesn't realize it was the evidence that put her over the threshold. Caleb slides a document toward me, a summary of everything we've built together, everything Eleanor set in motion before she died. When she asks for the POA, you tell her you need time to think. You bring the paperwork to me. And then we end this. I stand to leave, my mind heavy with strategy and memory. At the door, Caleb's voice stops me. Thomas, one more thing. I turn. He's holding the photograph from the shelf, the one of the three of us laughing, and his expression has softened into something almost tender. Eleanor left you more than a plan. That USB you found, it contains her voice. Her testimony recorded 3 months before she passed. She knew she might not be here to speak for you, so she made sure her words would survive. He sets the photo down carefully. When you're ready to act, not just react, open it, but not before. You'll know when the time is right. I nod, unable to speak, and step out into the hallway. Eleanor's voice waiting for me in the dark, her final gift, her last protection. I'm not ready yet, but I will be. The days that follow my meeting with Caleb take on a strange quality, like watching a play from backstage when you already know the ending. I move through the house as I always have. Quiet, accommodating, invisible, but now I see everything differently. Now I understand that I'm not the audience. I'm the one holding the script. Vanessa, meanwhile, has never been happier. The BMW post crossed 1,000 likes 3 days after she posted it. I know this because she announced it at breakfast, scrolling through her phone with the satisfaction of someone who believes the world has finally recognized her worth. Her father, Frank, calls daily sometimes, twice, gushing gratitude that I can hear through the phone, even from across the room. "You're the best daughter a man could ask for," he says. And Vanessa glows like she's just been crowned. She's convinced she has me completely under control. I see it in the way she speaks to me now, slowly. Simply as if addressing a child or a particularly dim pet. "Sweet old man" is probably how she describes me to her friends. Someone who doesn't understand finances, who just does what he's told, who can be managed with smiles and gentle suggestions. I hear her on the phone with her mother one afternoon, her voice carrying from the living room while she thinks I'm napping in my room. "He's so easy to manage, Mom. Honestly, it's almost too simple. He doesn't question anything, just signs whatever I put in front of him and goes back to his little notebook." She laughs. Her mother laughs. I add the date and time to my records. What Vanessa doesn't realize is that every word she speaks in this house is building the case against her. Every dismissive comment, every financial maneuver, every assumption that I'm too old or too slow to notice all of it feeds the documentation I've been compiling for 3 years. She thinks she's the architect of this situation. She doesn't know she's laying bricks in her own prison. She begins preparing the next phase with characteristic efficiency. I notice the browser history on the family computer she's been researching. Power of attorney forms, elder care laws, financial guardianship procedures. One evening, I pass the office and glimpse her at the printer collecting pages that she quickly tucks into a folder when she hears my footsteps. She's practicing her speech, I realize, rehearsing the concerned daughter-in-law, the responsible caretaker who only wants what's best for the family. I almost admire the craftsmanship. Almost. The garage has become my refuge lately, a place where I can think without Vanessa's presence pressing against me. I've been organizing the tools, Eleanor's excuse for me, back when she was alive and wanted to give me space. "Thomas is in the garage," she'd say to visitors. "He's organizing." It was our code for he needs to be alone with his thoughts. I'm sorting wrenches by size when Ryan appears in the doorway. He stands there for a moment, uncertain, like a man who's wandered into a room and forgotten why he came. Then he steps inside, pretends to look for something on the workbench, and speaks without looking at me. "Dad, did Mom ever say anything to you about us, about Vanessa?" The question hangs in the dusty air. I set down the wrench in my hand and turn to face my son. He looks tired. Older than 45 somehow. The lines around his eyes weren't there 3 years ago. "Your mother saw people clearly, Ryan," I say carefully. "Even when they didn't want to be seen." He doesn't respond. But something shifts in his expression, a flicker behind his eyes, doubt or recognition, or the first crack in a wall he's spent years building. He nods once, picks up a random screwdriver he doesn't need, and leaves without another word. It's not much, but it's something. A seed, maybe planted in soil I'd thought was barren. Dinner that evening is Vanessa's stage. She waits until we're all seated, until the food is served and the wine is poured, before producing the folder with theatrical casualness. "I've been thinking, Dad," she begins, sliding papers across the table toward me, "about the future, about making sure everything is in order." I look at the documents. Power of attorney forms, just as Caleb predicted. Comprehensive ones. Financial, medical, the works. If I signed these, Vanessa would have complete legal control over my life. "It's just for emergencies," she continues, her voice honey smooth. "What if something happens and we can't access your accounts? What if you're in the hospital and decisions need to be made? We need to protect the family. Dad, this is just responsible planning." I examine the papers, slowly turning each page as if I'm genuinely struggling to understand the legal language. I ask innocent questions. What does this clause mean? Why does this section require initials and watch? Vanessa's patience stretched thin beneath her smile. Finally, I set the papers down and say, I should have my own lawyer look at these, just to understand them better. You know how confusing legal documents can be for someone my age. Her smile tightens almost imperceptibly. Of course, Dad. Whatever makes you comfortable. But her eyes tell a different story. She wasn't expecting resistance. She doesn't know how to process it. Ryan says nothing throughout the meal. He stares at his plate, moves food around with his fork, and excuses himself early. Vanessa watches him go with a flicker of annoyance, then turns back to me with renewed warmth. Take your time with those papers, Dad. No rush at all. I nod and thank her for understanding. That night, lying in my bed with the lights off, I hear them. Voices from the master bedroom, muffled but unmistakable. Vanessa's sharp and defensive. Ryan's lower, harder to read, but insistent in a way I haven't heard in years. I can't make out the words, but I recognize the tone, the rhythm of an argument where one person is finally pushing back, finally questioning, finally refusing to accept the easy answer. For the first time in 3 years, Ryan is fighting. I don't know what it means yet, but I lie in the darkness listening to my son find his voice, and I feel something I'd almost forgotten. Hope. The argument I heard through the walls lasted nearly an hour. When morning comes, Vanessa is quieter than usual. Her smile slightly forced her movements sharp with suppressed irritation. Ryan left for work early before I woke, which tells me everything I need to know about how their conversation ended. Something has shifted between them. Whether it's enough remains to be seen. I wait until Vanessa leaves for her yoga class. She never misses it. Scheduled disruptions being for lesser people, before I gather the power of attorney documents and call a taxi. The bus would take too long today. There's an urgency building in my chest, a sense that events are accelerating towards something I need to be ready for. Caleb is waiting when I arrive, his office door open, 2 cups of coffee already steaming on his desk. He takes the documents from my hands with the gravity of a man receiving evidence in a capital case, which in some ways this is. The capital at stake isn't a life, it's everything I've built. Everything Eleanor and I saved, every dollar meant to carry me through whatever years I have left. We review the papers together page by page, clause by clause. What Vanessa presented as simple protection reveals itself under Caleb's analysis as something far more comprehensive. The POA wouldn't just give her access to my checking account. It would grant her control over my entire estate, my investment portfolios, my decisions about medical care. There's even a clause buried in dense legal language that would allow her to modify the trust itself. This isn't protection, Caleb says, his voice tight with controlled anger. This is a takeover. If you'd signed this, Thomas, she would have had complete authority over your life. She could have moved you to a facility, sold your assets, changed your beneficiaries, all without your consent, all perfectly legal because you would have given her the power to do it. I stare at the papers, seeing them clearly now. Every emergency provision designed to strip my autonomy, every family protection clause, actually protecting Vanessa's access to my wealth. She must have worked on this for weeks, maybe months, consulting templates, perhaps even lawyers who didn't ask too many questions about her intentions. She almost had me, I admit quietly. Almost doesn't count in law, Caleb replies. He opens a filing cabinet and pulls out the folder we've been building together, the Caldwell Protection Protocol. Into it go the POA documents joining 3 years of evidence, financial records, notebook entries, photographs of receipts, the screenshot of the BMW post with Ryan's comment beneath it. The folder is thick now, substantial. It has weight. We have enough, Thomas. Caleb closes the folder, his hand resting on it like a judge's gavel waiting to fall. Financial exploitation is clearly documented. Pattern of emotional manipulation established. The POA attempt shows intent to gain undue control. When you're ready, we can convene a family trust meeting and present everything. The elder protection provision can be activated. This can end. I should feel relief. Instead, I feel something more complicated, grief maybe for the family I thought I had, for the son I raised who let this happen, for the relationship I wanted with my daughter-in-law that never existed outside my own hopes. Almost ready, I say. One more thing first. Caleb nods as if he expected this. He turns to the wall behind his desk where a framed painting conceals what I now realize is a safe. He enters a combination and the door swings open. Inside, I glimpse documents folders, the usual contents of a lawyer's secure storage. But my eyes catch on something else. 3 envelopes arranged neatly, each one bearing Eleanor's handwriting. One labeled Thomas, one labeled Ryan, and one with no name at all, just a date written in her careful script, a date 6 months from now. Caleb notices me looking. He doesn't try to hide them or redirect my attention. Instead, he says simply, Eleanor was thorough. She planned for every possibility, not just the ones we discussed, but the ones she anticipated on her own. Some things aren't meant to be opened yet. She was very specific about timing. 3 envelopes, 3 messages from beyond the grave. I think of Eleanor in her final months sitting at her desk while the cancer ate away at her writing letters to people who wouldn't read them until she was gone. Planning for futures she wouldn't see, protecting people who didn't know they needed protection. The USB, I say. Is it time? Caleb reaches into the safe and withdraws it, the same small drive I found beneath Eleanor's scarves, the one labeled in her handwriting. He holds it for a moment, weighing something in his mind, then places it in my palm with the solemnity of a sacred object being transferred. It's time, Thomas. Go home. Watch it alone. Let Eleanor tell you what she needs you to know. He pauses and his eyes meet mine with an intensity I haven't seen before. She recorded this 3 months before she passed. She was weak, but her mind was clear. Every word was deliberate. Every sentence was chosen. He takes a breath. And then after you've heard her, we end this. I close my fingers around the USB, feeling its edges press into my skin. Such a small thing to carry such enormous weight. The taxi ride home passes in a blur. I watch the streets of Denver slide past the window, the mountains in the distance, the ordinary lives of ordinary people going about their ordinary days. None of them know that I'm carrying my wife's voice in my pocket. None of them know that tonight, for the first time in 2 years, Eleanor will speak to me again. The USB sits in my coat like a heartbeat, like a promise, like the last gift a dying woman could give to the man she spent 40 years loving. I think about what Caleb said, that Eleanor planned for possibilities she never discussed with me, that she wrote letters with dates in the future anticipating needs I haven't felt yet. She knew me better than I knew myself. She loved me more than I deserved, and even from the grave, she's still protecting me. The house is empty when I arrive. Vanessa at yoga, Ryan at work, just me and the silence and the USB that's been waiting 2 years for this moment. Tonight, Eleanor speaks. Tonight, everything changes. I wait until midnight when the house settles into the deep silence of sleep. Ryan and Vanessa went to bed hours ago, their door closing with a quiet click that echoed through the hallway. I've been sitting in my room since dinner, the USB in my hand, turning it over and over like a worry stone. Now, finally, it's time. I lock my bedroom door, something I've never done in 3 years of living here, and retrieve my old laptop from the closet. It's outdated, slower than modern machines, but it still works. Eleanor bought it for me 8 years ago, insisted I learn to use it, even though I protested that paper and pen had served me fine for decades. The world is changing, Thomas, she said. Don't get left behind. I insert the USB. A single video file appears on the screen. I click play. Eleanor appears and my breath stops. She's thinner than I remembered, the cancer already hollowing her cheeks, already dimming the light behind her skin. But her eyes are exactly as I've carried them in my memory. Bright, knowing. The eyes of a woman who saw the world clearly even when clarity was painful. The recording date in the corner, 3 months before she died. Thomas. She begins. And her voice, God, her voice. It's weaker than I remember, but still hers, still the voice that said, I do. 43 years ago, still the voice that whispered, I love you, in the dark for 4 decades of nights. If you're watching this, then she's shown her true colors. I'm sorry I was right, my love. I hoped I'd be wrong. She pauses, gathering strength, and continues. I noticed Vanessa from their first meeting, the way she looked at our house, not with admiration, but with calculation. The way she inventoried our belongings with her eyes while pretending to admire family photos. The way she paused before every compliment, as if running the words through some internal formula to determine their strategic value. Eleanor shakes her head slightly. I didn't want to ruin Ryan's happiness. He loved her, or thought he did, and what mother wants to be the one who destroys her son's joy, so I prepared instead. She explains the trust, the elder protection provision, the legal architecture she and Caleb constructed while I thought we were simply updating our estate planning. All you needed was evidence, she says, and a faint smile crosses her lips. And knowing you, my love, my meticulous patient accountant husband, you've been gathering it all along. You probably have a notebook somewhere, don't you? Dates and amounts and patterns. That's who you are, Thomas. You see the numbers. You always have. I touch the screen involuntarily, my fingers brushing the image of her face. Her voice breaks slightly as she continues. There's a letter for Ryan, too. But he's not ready yet. He needs to choose his own path back to you, Thomas. He needs to wake up on his own, see what's happening, decide who he wants to be. Don't give him the letter until he's earned it, till he proves he's still the boy we raised, not the man she's made him into. She pauses, looking down for a moment, composing herself. And Thomas, there's one more envelope, but that one's for later. After everything is finished, Caleb knows when. She looks up again, directly into the camera, directly into me. I planned for every possibility I could imagine, but I couldn't plan for how much I'd miss you, how much I'd want to be there standing beside you, holding your hand through whatever comes. Tears are streaming down my face now. I don't try to stop them. I love you, Thomas. I always will. And I'll protect you from wherever I am, from whatever comes after this life, from whatever place the people who love us go when they can't stay. Her eyes hold mine through the screen, through time, through death itself. Trust yourself. You've never been weak. You've been waiting, patient and careful, and gathering what you need, just like you've done your whole life. Her voice steadies, strengthens. The wait is over now. The screen goes dark. Eleanor is gone. I sit in the silence of my room weeping. Not from grief I've done that grieving walked through that valley in the months after she died. This is something different. This is the overwhelming experience of being known so completely by another person that even death can't sever the connection. Eleanor saw me. She understood me. She loved the parts of me I thought were weaknesses and recognized them as strengths I hadn't claimed yet. She gave me permission to stop waiting. She gave me permission to act. A knock on my door shatters the moment. Dad? Vanessa's voice, falsely sweet, the honey-coated tone she uses when she wants something. Dad, you okay in there? Dinner's ready. We need to discuss when you're signing those papers. I close the laptop, wipe my face with the back of my hand, and take 3 deep breaths before unlocking the door. Vanessa stands in the hallway with her practiced smile, but her eyes flicker to my face, searching for something, weakness perhaps, or confusion. Whatever she's looking for, I make sure she doesn't find it. Dinner sounds wonderful, I say, and my voice is steady. Eleanor's voice is still ringing in my ears, but I've spent 40 years keeping emotion out of business conversations. This is business now. The dining table is set with unusual care. Candles flicker in holders we haven't used since Christmas. The good china is out, the kind Vanessa reserves for guests she wants to impress. And in the center of the table, steam rising from a ceramic dish, sits pot roast with root vegetables. My favorite meal, the one Eleanor used to make for my birthday every year. The manipulation is so transparent, it's almost insulting. I thought you deserved something special, Dad, Vanessa says, serving me a generous portion. You've been looking tired lately. We need to take better care of you. I eat calmly, complimenting the food, watching everything. Ryan sits across from me, pushing carrots around his plate, his jaw tight. He hasn't looked at Vanessa once since we sat down. Whatever passed between them last night left marks that haven't healed. Vanessa lets the small talk run its course, whether neighborhood gossip. A story about her yoga instructor that requires no response before steering toward her true purpose. So, Dad? She says, her tone shifting into something more businesslike. The lawyer meeting is next week. We really need to get those papers signed before then. It's just practical, you know. What if something happens to you and we can't access your accounts? What if there's a medical emergency and decisions need to be made quickly? I set down my fork carefully. I've decided to wait. My own attorney will review everything first. The words land like stones in still water. Vanessa's smile freezes, and for just a moment the mask slips. I see the calculation behind her eyes, the quick recalibration of someone whose plan has hit an unexpected obstacle. Your attorney. She recovers quickly, but not quickly enough. Why would you need... She catches herself, smooths her expression back into concerned warmth. I mean, that seems unnecessary, but fine. Of course, whatever makes you comfortable. Caleb Whitmore, I say, watching her face. He handled our estate planning for years. Eleanor trusted him completely. At the mention of Eleanor's name, something shifts in the room. Ryan's head comes up. Vanessa's eyes narrow almost imperceptibly. "Well," she says, and her voice has an edge now, the sweetness wearing thin. "I'm sure Mr. Whitmore is very competent, but these are standard documents, Dad. There's really no need to complicate things." I don't see it as complication. I see it as caution. Caution. She repeats the word as if tasting something bitter. "You're being paranoid, Dad, just like Eleanor was." The air in the room goes cold. "She spent years making everything complicated," Vanessa continues, frustration bleeding through her composure now, the pressure of weeks of planning meeting unexpected resistance. Trusts and provisions and lawyers always trying to control everyone from the background even after she was gone. Honestly, Ryan has a chance to finally make his own decisions without her shadow over everything, and you're pulling the same manipulative nonsense. She doesn't see my expression harden. She doesn't notice Ryan go absolutely still, his fork suspended halfway to his mouth. She's too caught up in her own grievances, too confident that she's speaking to a helpless old man who will absorb whatever she dishes out. "Eleanor was many things," I say quietly, "but she was never manipulative. She was protective. There's a difference." "Protective?" Vanessa laughs an ugly sound. "Is that what we're calling it?" She couldn't even let Ryan grow up without hovering over every decision. And now you're doing the same thing. Ryan stands abruptly. His napkin hits the table. His chair scrapes back against the hardwood floor with a sound like a door slamming. He doesn't speak. He doesn't defend his mother or condemn his wife. He simply looks at Vanessa for one long moment, a look I can't read from this angle, and then walks out of the room. His footsteps echo down the hallway. A door opens and closes. Vanessa stares after him, her face cycling through surprise, confusion, and anger. "What's his problem?" she mutters, then turns back to me with a forced smile. "Anyway, Dad, about those papers?" "I think dinner is finished," I say, rising from the table. "Thank you for the pot roast." Eleanor would have appreciated the gesture. I leave her sitting there, surrounded by her careful staging, her untouched wine, her plans unraveling in ways she doesn't yet understand. In my room, I sit on the edge of the bed and let the significance of the moment settle over me. Vanessa just publicly disrespected Eleanor's memory and character. She called my wife manipulative, controlling a shadow that needed to be escaped. She said these things in front of me and Ryan, with witnesses present, in a documented pattern of emotional abuse towards someone whose protection provisions are now very much in play. The elder protection provision has been triggered. Caleb will confirm it, but I know. Everything we built, Eleanor and Caleb and I, everything we prepared for 3 years has led to this moment. All I need now is the formal meeting. From down the hallway, I hear voices. Ryan's low and controlled, but unmistakably angry. Vanessa's rising in defensive protest. I can't make out the words, but I don't need to. The tone is enough. The rhythm of an argument where one person is finally refusing to back down. Then silence. Then a door slam that shakes the walls. For the first time in 3 years, my son is pushing back. I don't know what this means for him, for his marriage, for the path he'll choose, but I know what it means for me. The wait is over. The night passes in fragments. I hear Ryan moving through the house at odd hours, footsteps in the hallway at 2, the refrigerator opening at 4, the creak of the back porch swing just before dawn. He's not sleeping either. Whatever broke inside him at that dinner table is keeping him awake, forcing him to look at things he spent 3 years avoiding. Morning finds me in the garage organizing tools I don't need to organize. It's Eleanor's old excuse, my refuge, when the house feels too small and the air too thick. I'm sorting screwdrivers by length when a shadow falls across the workbench. Ryan stands in the doorway, a coffee cup clutched in both hands, looking like a man who's been through a war he didn't know he was fighting. "Dad." His voice is rough. "Can we talk?" I nod, set down the tool in my hand, and wait. I've learned the value of silence over 68 years. Sometimes the most important words need empty space to find their way out. Ryan steps into the garage, looks around as if seeing it for the first time, then leans against the workbench across from me. He struggles to find words. I watch him try to begin sentences, abandon them, try again. Finally, he says what he came to say. Did Mom know about Vanessa? The question hangs in the dusty air between us. I consider just for a moment lying to him, protecting him from the knowledge that his mother saw through his wife from the beginning, shielding him from the guilt of knowing that the woman who raised him died, worried about what would happen to his father. But then I remember Eleanor's voice on that video, clear, certain, unwavering. The truth, even when it hurts, is the only foundation that holds. Your mother saw people clearly, Ryan. She noticed things about Vanessa early on, the way she looked at the house, the way she calculated before she complimented. Mom hoped she was wrong. I paused, measuring my words. She prepared in case she wasn't. Ryan's face crumbles slightly, the carefully maintained composure of a man who spent years pretending everything was fine, finally giving way. Why didn't anyone tell me? His voice cracks. Why didn't you say something? Why didn't Mom? Would you have listened? The question stops him cold. He opens his mouth to answer, then closes it again. We both know the truth. 3 years ago, drunk on new love and desperate to believe he'd found happiness, Ryan wouldn't have heard a word against Vanessa. He would have defended her. He would have accused us of jealousy, of interference, of not wanting him to have his own life. He would have pushed us away entirely. He wasn't ready then. He might not be entirely ready now. But something is different. Something has shifted. I've been recording her, Ryan says quietly, staring at his coffee. The last 2 weeks. Everything she says when she thinks no one's paying attention. He looks up, meets my eyes with something between shame and determination. I didn't know why at first. I just needed to know what was real, what she actually thinks versus what she says to my face. I feel something I haven't felt in years, something I'd almost forgotten how to recognize. Hope. Not the wishful kind that ignores evidence, but the real kind. The kind built on action, on choice, on a person deciding to open their eyes even when keeping them closed would be easier. What did you find? I ask. Ryan's jaw tightens. Enough. Enough to know Mom was right. Enough to know I've been a fool. He sets down his coffee, runs a hand through his hair. I sent the files to someone this morning. Mom's lawyer, Caleb Whitmore. I found his information in her old papers. I thought... He trails off uncertain. I thought maybe they'd help somehow. Before I can respond, my phone buzzes in my pocket. Caleb's number glows on the screen. I show it to Ryan, and his eyes widen. Answer it, he says. Please. I accept the call. Caleb. Thomas. His voice carries the particular energy of a man approaching the finish line of a long race. I received a package this morning. Audio files. Seems someone else has been building a case alongside you. I hear papers shuffling in the background. Your son has quite a collection. Vanessa discussing how to manage you. Plans to sell the house once she has control. Some very illuminating conversations with her mother about the timeline for getting you out of the picture. I look at Ryan, who's watching me with anxious eyes. What does this mean? It means we have more than enough. I'm convening the family trust meeting, Monday, 10 a.m. Everyone will be there, you, Ryan, Vanessa, her father, Frank. We present everything, your documentation, the POA, attempt, Eleanor's video, Ryan's recordings. This ends in 5 days, Thomas. 5 days. 3 years of patience, of planning, of quiet endurance, all of it culminating in 5 days. We'll be ready, I say, and end the call. Ryan is staring at me. Monday. He nods, slowly processing. I can see the fear in him, fear of confrontation, of consequences of the life he built crumbling around him. But beneath the fear is something stronger. Resolution. The determination of a man who has finally chosen a side. Dinner that evening is a strange performance. Vanessa, unaware of the morning's developments, has recovered her composure and her agenda. She serves pasta with the efficiency of someone who has moved past yesterday's unpleasantness and refocused on her goals. Good news, she announces, setting down the salad bowl. The trust meeting is Monday. I spoke with the administrator's office today. Finally, we can sort this whole mess out and get things properly organized. She smiles at me, all warmth and reasonableness. It'll be such a relief to have everything settled, won't it, Dad? I meet Ryan's eyes across the table. He holds my gaze for a long moment, longer than he has in 3 years. Neither of us speaks. Neither of us needs to. An understanding passes between us, silent and complete. Father and son finally on the same side of a line that should never have divided us. Yes, I say quietly, turning back to Vanessa with an expression she'll interpret as agreement. Let's end this. The 5 days pass with excruciating slowness. Vanessa busies herself with preparations for what she believes will be her triumph. New dress hair appointment, detailed notes about family financial planning. She has no idea she's preparing for her own unmasking. I watch her bustle around the house, confident and cheerful, and I feel something unexpected pity. She built her whole identity on manipulation and control, and in a few days that foundation will crumble beneath her. Monday morning arrives gray and cold, the Colorado sky heavy with clouds that threaten but don't deliver. Ryan drives us to Caleb's office in silence. Vanessa sits in the front seat checking her makeup in the mirror, making small talk that neither of us returns. Frank Miller meets us in the parking lot looking uncomfortable in a suit that doesn't quite fit already. Sensing that something is wrong, but unable to identify what. Caleb's conference room is larger than his personal office, designed for exactly this kind of meeting. A long mahogany table dominates the space, surrounded by leather chairs. At one end, Caleb has arranged folders, documents, a laptop connected to a wall-mounted screen. He greets each of us formally, his face revealing nothing. We take our seats. Vanessa positions herself at the center of the table, confident in her new navy dress, a legal pad in front of her, as if she's the one running this meeting. Frank sits beside her, fidgeting. Ryan sits across from them next to me. The battle lines are drawn, though only half the room knows a battle is coming. Thank you all for being here. Caleb begins, his voice carrying the measured authority of 30 years in law. As trustee of the Eleanor Caldwell Living Trust, I've called this meeting to address some concerns that have come to my attention regarding the treatment of our primary beneficiary, Thomas Caldwell. Vanessa's smile flickers. This isn't how she expected things to start. Caleb opens the first folder. The trust contains an elder protection provision, a clause designed to safeguard Thomas from financial exploitation or emotional abuse. Over the past 3 years, evidence has been gathered suggesting that this provision has been violated. He clicks a button, and the screen illuminates with Thomas's notebook entries. Dates, amounts, patterns. 3 years of documentation laid bare. Financial records showing disproportionate contribution to household expenses from Thomas's retirement savings. Documented instances of emotional manipulation and systematic isolation. Vanessa's face cycles through confusion, anger, disbelief. What is this? Those are just family expenses. Shared costs. There's nothing. Caleb continues unmoved. The attempted power of attorney. He produces the documents Vanessa gave me, now marked with legal annotations. These papers would have granted you control not only over Thomas's finances, but over his medical decisions, his ability to modify the trust, and his choice of residence. This constitutes attempted undue influence under Colorado law. I was trying to protect him. Vanessa's voice rises. He's old, he forgets things, someone needs to... There's more. Caleb clicks again, and Eleanor appears on the screen. My wife's face, thin but determined, fills the room. Her recorded voice explains the elder protection provision in clear legal terms, what it covers, how it's triggered, what happens when someone violates its conditions. Vanessa watches with growing horror as a dead woman dismantles her plans. This is ridiculous, Vanessa sputters when the clip ends. He's clearly being manipulated by his dead wife's paranoia. Eleanor was always controlling, always suspicious. She poisoned Thomas against me from the beginning. I have something to add. Ryan's voice cuts through the room like a blade. He stands slowly, reaching into his jacket pocket, and places his phone on the table. Vanessa's eyes widen. What are you doing? She demands. Ryan doesn't answer. He opens an audio file and presses play. Vanessa's voice fills the conference room, clear and damning. He's so easy to manage. Honestly, it's almost too simple. Another clip. Once I have the POA, we can sell his share of the house and he'll never even know. Another Vanessa laughing, telling her mother, the old man thinks he's part of the family. It's actually kind of pathetic how grateful he is for scraps. 2 weeks of recordings, every dismissive comment, every scheming conversation, every cruel joke made when she thought no one was listening, each word in her own voice, undeniable, inescapable. Vanessa's composure shatters completely. Ryan. She turns to her husband with wild eyes. What are you? How could you? Those were private conversations. You had no right. I had every right. Ryan's voice is steady in a way I've never heard before. You were stealing from my father, lying to me, planning to take everything he has and throw him away when he had nothing left to give. He meets her gaze without flinching. I'm choosing my father. I'm choosing the truth. I should have done this years ago. Frank Miller stands abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Without a word, without even a glance at his daughter, he walks out of the conference room. The door clicks shut behind him. Vanessa stares after him, abandoned by her own father the moment the money disappeared. Caleb clears his throat. As trustee of the Eleanor Caldwell Living Trust, I'm formally invoking the Elder Protection Provision. Based on documented evidence of financial exploitation and emotional abuse, Vanessa Lawson is immediately removed as a beneficiary of the trust. The attempted power of attorney is void. All joint accounts involving Thomas Caldwell are frozen, pending review. He closes the folder with finality. Mrs. Lawson has no legal claim to any Caldwell assets. The words fall like a gavel. Vanessa sits frozen, her careful plans in ruins around her, her husband standing against her father gone. She turns to Ryan with pure hatred burning in her eyes. You'll regret this for the rest of your life. Ryan doesn't flinch. No, he says quietly. I'll regret the years I didn't do this. The meeting ends not with shouting, but with silence. Vanessa gathers her things with trembling hands, her face a mask of shock that hasn't yet processed into rage. Ryan remains seated, staring at the table, looking like a man who has just detonated his own life. I watch them both, feeling not triumph, but a strange emptiness, the hollow space left behind when a battle finally ends. The weeks that follow are brutal for Vanessa, though I only hear about them secondhand. Ryan files for legal separation 3 days after the meeting. She contests it, initially threatens lawyers and lawsuits and consequences, but the recordings have destroyed any leverage she might have had. Her attorney advises her to accept reasonable terms and move on quietly. She doesn't take the advice, but the law doesn't require her agreement to proceed. The BMW becomes a symbol of her exposure. Martha Peterson. My kind neighbor, who once praised Vanessa's generosity, now speaks to me with careful sympathy, never mentioning the car or the Facebook post. But I hear the whispers when I walk to the mailbox. The neighborhood knows. Small towns have long memories, and suburban streets are small towns in disguise. The woman who presented herself as a devoted daughter has been revealed as something else entirely. And the community has rendered its verdict in sidelong glances and conversations that stop when she approaches. Her social media goes silent. The account that once blazed with carefully curated images of blessed life and family first hasn't posted in weeks. I check it once, not from spite, but from a strange need to understand, and find the BMW post still there, still accumulating comments, though now some of them are less kind. Someone tagged her in a local news article about elder financial abuse. She hasn't responded. Her mother, I'm told, has stopped answering calls. The woman who laughed with Vanessa about how easy I was to manage apparently wants no association with the fallout. Fair-weather family, Eleanor would have called them. People who show up for the sunshine and disappear at the first sign of rain. Frank Miller's reckoning is perhaps the most fitting. The BMW that started all this, the gleaming black symbol of his daughter's devotion, must be returned or purchased outright. He cannot afford to purchase it. The man who patted that hood in my driveway, who thanked me for raising a son who picked a winner, now faces the humiliation of surrendering his prize. But the financial loss is nothing compared to what follows. I hear through Ryan that Vanessa has turned on her father with the same viciousness she once reserved for me. "You wanted that car?" she screamed at him during a phone call Ryan overheard. "You kept pushing me to get more to secure our future. This is your fault." Frank, who abandoned her without a word the moment the money disappeared, now won't speak to her at all. The father she supposedly did everything for has proven exactly as loyal as she taught him to be. Ryan moves into a small apartment across town during the separation. I know the address because Caleb mentioned it, not because Ryan told me himself. The guilt he carries is enormous. I can see it in the few glimpses I catch of him, the weight in his shoulders, the way he avoids looking at the house when he comes to collect his things. He's not guilty for exposing Vanessa. He's guilty for the years he enabled her, for the silence he maintained, while his father was slowly bled dry for the son he wasn't when his father needed him most. He sends me a text message one evening, 3 words that arrive while I'm sitting in Eleanor's chair watching the sunset. "I'm sorry, Dad, for everything." I read it several times. I don't respond immediately. Forgiveness isn't that simple. It shouldn't be. 3 years of watching my son choose his wife over his father, 3 years of silence and complicity and averted eyes that doesn't dissolve with a text message. Ryan needs to understand that words are easy. Words are where Vanessa lived. What matters now is what he does. I meet Caleb for coffee a week after the meeting. We sit in a quiet corner of a cafe downtown. Two old men who have known each other for decades, bound now by a shared victory we don't quite know how to celebrate. Eleanor was right, I tell him, stirring cream into my cup. The truth reveals itself when you stop forcing it. He nods, understanding more than I say. She usually was right, about most things. I hesitate, then ask the question that's been circling my mind since I glimpsed those envelopes in his safe. The third envelope, the one with no name. Is it time? Caleb shakes his head slowly. Not yet. That one's for when everything is settled. Eleanor was specific about the timing. He meets my eyes with an expression I can't quite read. She knew you, Thomas. She knew you'd want to rush forward to have all the answers at once, but some things need space to breathe, some truths need the right moment to land. I accept this, though patience has never been harder than it is now. Eleanor is still teaching me, still guiding me, still one step ahead even from beyond the grave. 2 weeks pass. The house feels different without Vanessa's presence, quieter. Yes, but also lighter, as if the walls themselves have exhaled. I find myself reclaiming spaces I'd ceded without realizing it. The kitchen, where I now cook my own meals. The living room, where I watch the news without commentary. The garage, where I organize tools simply because I want to, not because I need to escape. I'm in that garage when I hear the car pull into the driveway. Footsteps approach, hesitant, uncertain. Then a shadow falls across the doorway, and Ryan stands there holding a small bouquet of white roses. Eleanor's favorite. He looks thinner than he did 2 weeks ago, older somehow, though only days have passed. His eyes are red-rimmed, his jaw tight with emotions he's struggling to contain. "Dad," he says, his voice cracking slightly, "I know I don't deserve it. But can we talk?" I look at my son standing in the garage doorway, white roses trembling slightly in his grip, and I feel the weight of the moment pressing down on both of us. 3 years of silence, of complicity, of a relationship eroded by omission, all of it hanging in the space between us, waiting to see what comes next. "Come inside," I say finally. "We'll talk in the living room." We sit across from each other in chairs that haven't held this particular configuration in years. No Vanessa between us orchestrating the conversation, steering it toward her purposes. No pretense of family harmony. Just a son who failed his father, and a father deciding whether to let him back in. Ryan sets the roses on the coffee table, a peace offering he doesn't know how to present. He looks at his hands, then at the floor, then finally at me. When he speaks, his voice is raw. "I knew, Dad. Some part of me always knew." He swallows hard, forces himself to continue. "The way she talked about you when you weren't around, the way money kept disappearing into projects that never quite made sense, the way you got smaller every year, quieter, more careful." He meets my eyes, and I see the shame there, deep and genuine. It was easier to believe her lies than to face what I was letting happen to you. If I admitted she was manipulating you, I'd have to admit I'd chosen her over my own father. I couldn't face that, so I didn't. I listen without interrupting. He needs to say this, needs to hear himself speak the truth out loud. Confession is the first step, but only the first. "I told myself you were fine," he continues, "that you wanted to help, that family shares expenses and sacrifices together." She had an answer for everything, and I wanted to believe those answers because believing them meant I wasn't complicit. His voice breaks slightly. But I was. I was complicit in everything she did to you, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Dad. The apology hangs in the air, sincere and inadequate. I've waited years to hear these words, imagined this conversation in countless variations during sleepless nights. Now that it's happening, I find that the words alone aren't enough. They can't be enough. Words are easy, Ryan. I keep my voice gentle but firm. This isn't about punishment. It's about truth. I've had 3 years of words from everyone in this house. Vanessa had beautiful words, family, sacrifice, protection. You had words too, even if most of them were silence. Words are how we got here. He flinches but doesn't argue. Good. He's listening, really listening, maybe for the first time. What matters now isn't what you say, it's what you do. Actions have weight that words don't carry. If you want to rebuild what we lost, you'll have to build it with your hands, not your voice. Ryan nods slowly, accepting this. Tell me what to do. Whatever it takes. I consider him carefully, this man who was once my little boy, who used to follow me around the garage asking questions about every tool, who grew into someone I barely recognized under Vanessa's influence. Is he still in there? The son Eleanor and I raised, I want to believe he is. But wanting isn't knowing. Your mother left you something, I say. A letter. She wrote it before she died, meant for you to read when the time was right. Hope flickers across his face, followed immediately by grief. Mom left me a letter. She did. But you're not ready for it yet. She was specific about that. I hold up a hand before he can protest. Eleanor knew you, Ryan. She knew you'd make mistakes, and she knew you'd eventually want to make them right. But she also knew that some gifts have to be earned. You'll get her letter when you've proven you're still the man she believed you could be, not before. He's quiet for a long moment, processing this. I watch him struggle with the desire to argue, to insist he's ready now, to demand his mother's final words as a birthright. But something has changed in him, some new maturity forged in the fire of the past weeks. He doesn't argue, he simply nods. What do I need to do? Show up, not with phone calls or text messages, in person, every week. Let me see who you are when you're not performing for anyone. I pause, choosing my next words carefully. Be transparent about your finances. No more secrets, no more accounts I don't know about. If we're going to be family again, we start with honesty. Okay, what else? The divorce proceedings. Don't protect Vanessa from the consequences of what she did. Don't soften the truth to spare her feelings or minimize your own involvement. She made choices and she needs to face them. So do you. Ryan takes a deep breath and lets it out slowly. I'll do it, all of it. Weekly visits, complete transparency, no protecting Vanessa. He looks at me with something I haven't seen in his eyes for years. Determination unmixed with avoidance. I'll earn it, Dad, however long it takes. I don't embrace him. I don't tell him everything is forgiven. Instead, I stand, pick up the white roses, and find a vase to put them in. Eleanor would have liked that her favorite flowers, given in genuine remorse, accepted without fanfare. Sunday dinners, I say, filling the vase with water. Start there. 3 months pass. Ryan keeps every promise. He appears every Sunday at 5 o'clock, sometimes with groceries, sometimes with questions about the house, always with time. We talk about small things. At first the weather, his new apartment, memories of Eleanor that we'd both been too wounded to share. Slowly, carefully, we begin to talk about larger things. The divorce finalizes in month 2. Ryan doesn't contest, doesn't negotiate for Vanessa's benefit, doesn't try to soften what happened. He faces it fully, and I watch him grow from the experience. He's living simply now, a small apartment, a modest car, a life stripped of the pretensions Vanessa cultivated. He seems lighter for it, more himself. I begin to recognize glimpses of the boy I raised emerging from beneath years of learned helplessness. One Sunday afternoon, as we're washing dishes together after dinner, my phone rings, Caleb's name on the screen. Thomas, he says when I answer, I think it's time. He's ready. Caleb's call changes everything and nothing. The words, he's ready, settle into me like a key turning in a lock I'd almost forgotten existed. Ryan stands beside me at the sink, dish towel in hand, watching my face with the alertness of someone who has learned to pay attention. That was Caleb, I say, setting down the phone. We need to talk, but not here, not today. The following week, I make a decision I've been circling for months. I sell the house on Maple Drive. Too many complicated memories live in those walls. Eleanor's absence, Vanessa's presence, 3 years of diminishment that I can't seem to scrub from the corners, no matter how many times I clean. The real estate agent is surprised by my certainty, by the speed with which I want to move. She doesn't understand that I'm not running from something. I'm walking toward something else. I buy a small apartment near Riverside Park, a modest 2-bedroom with large windows that let in the morning light. The building is quiet, filled with people my age who nod in hallways and respect each other's privacy. I can walk to the park every morning, watch the seasons change, reflected in the water, feed the ducks that have no interest in my financial assets or my family history. The silence here is different from the silence I knew before. This isn't the silence of being ignored. This is the silence of peace. I begin volunteering at the Senior Rights Center downtown, a place I discovered while researching elder abuse laws during my 3 years of documentation. They need people willing to share their experiences to help others recognize the signs that someone might be taking advantage of them. I offer my story anonymized but complete, and they accept. The first time I stand before a room of attentive faces, men and women my age, some accompanied by concerned adult children, some alone and uncertain, I feel Eleanor beside me encouraging me forward. "I'm not telling you this so you'll feel sorry for me," I say, looking at each of them in turn. "I'm telling you so you'll recognize the signs, so you'll understand that patience doesn't mean powerlessness, so you'll know that documenting what happens to you isn't paranoia, it's protection." They listen. Some nod in recognition. Some wipe tears from their eyes. Afterward, a woman approaches me with trembling hands and asks how I found the courage to act. "I didn't find it," I tell her honestly. "My wife left it for me. All I had to do was pick it up." Ryan has transformed in ways I didn't dare hope for. The divorce finalized 2 months ago, quietly and completely. He didn't fight for assets he hadn't earned, didn't try to negotiate on Vanessa's behalf, didn't protect her from the consequences she'd built for herself. He let the truth stand as testimony, and he walked away from the wreckage with nothing but clarity. He's taken a modest job at an accounting firm, smaller than where he worked before, less prestigious, but honest work that uses his skills without demanding his soul. He no longer chases the status symbols Vanessa insisted were necessary for happiness. His apartment is simple. His car is practical. His life, for perhaps the first time since his marriage, is his own. Every Sunday, he arrives at my new apartment with groceries I didn't ask for. He helps with repairs I could do myself, stays for dinner, and most importantly, listens. Really listens. We talk about things we never discussed during the Vanessa years, his childhood memories, my courtship with Eleanor, the dreams he abandoned and the ones he might still pursue. He's learning who I actually am, separate from who Vanessa told him I was. And I'm learning who he is, separate from the man his wife made him become. One Sunday, in late autumn, we drive together to Riverside Cemetery. The leaves have turned gold and crimson, carpeting the paths between the headstones. Eleanor's grave sits beneath an old oak tree, the stone simple and elegant, her name, her dates, and the words she chose herself. Love outlasts everything. Ryan stands before it in silence for a long moment. When he finally speaks, his voice is barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry it took losing you to finally see." I put my hand on his shoulder, feeling the solid reality of my son beneath my palm. "She sees you now, Ryan. She always did." We stand together as the wind moves through the oak leaves, as the afternoon light slants golden across the grass. Something has healed between us. Not completely, not perfectly, but genuinely. The foundation Eleanor built is holding, and we're building something new on top of it. I reach into my coat pocket and withdraw 2 envelopes. One bears Ryan's name in Eleanor's handwriting, the script I'd recognize anywhere. The other is blank except for today's date written in the same careful hand. Ryan's eyes widen when he sees them. "Your mother left these," I say, holding them out between us. "I think we're both ready now." The envelopes feel lighter than they should, considering the weight of what they carry. I hand Ryan his letter first, watching his face as he recognizes his mother's handwriting, as the reality of what he's holding settles into him. He opens it with trembling hands carefully, as if the paper itself is fragile. I give him privacy, turning to look at Eleanor's headstone while he reads. The oak leaves rustle above us, and somewhere in the distance a bird calls out to the fading afternoon. I hear his breath catch, then silence. Then a sound I haven't heard from my son since he was a boy, a raw, broken sob that comes from somewhere deeper than pride can reach. I turn back to find Ryan with the letter pressed against his chest. Tears streaming down his face, his whole body shaking with grief he's held inside for years. Without thinking, I step forward and pull him into my arms. He collapses against me, this 45-year-old man crying like the child he once was, and I hold him the way I held him when he was small, and the world seemed too big and frightening. "She forgave me," he manages between sobs. "She already forgave me, before I knew. That's who she was." I say quietly, my own voice thick. "That's who she always was." We stand there for a long time, father and son grieving together for the first time since Eleanor died. Something heals between us. In that cemetery embrace something that 3 years of silence had broken and 3 months of effort had only begun to repair. This is the final piece, the last wall coming down. When Ryan finally pulls back, wiping his face with his sleeve, he looks at the envelope still in my hand. "Aren't you going to open yours?" I look down at it, the blank envelope with today's date. Eleanor's final message saved for this exact moment. My hands aren't as steady as I'd like them to be as I break the seal. Her handwriting fills the page, and I hear her voice in every word. "Thomas, if you're reading this, everything is finished. The plan worked. I hope Caleb was right that it would. But I need to tell you something I couldn't say while I was alive. I'm sorry." I stop surprised. "Sorry, Eleanor, apologizing to me." I spent years preparing planning building protections, and I told myself it was all for you, but the truth is, some of it was for me. I was afraid, Thomas. Afraid of leaving you alone with people who might hurt you, afraid of not being there to protect you. And sometimes I wonder, was I protecting you, or was I controlling you? My throat tightens. This isn't what I expected. This isn't the triumphant conclusion I imagined. You are the kindest man I've ever known, the most patient, the most good. And my greatest fear was that your goodness would be used against you. So I built walls and plans and contingencies, but here's what I need you to hear. You don't need my protection anymore. You never really did. You were always strong enough. I just loved you too much to see it. Tears blur the words, and I have to blink to continue reading. So here's my final request. Live, Thomas. Not in my shadow, not in my plans, not waiting for the next letter or the next instruction. Just live. Find joy. Find peace. And if you're open to it, find companionship. Martha Peterson is a good woman. She lost her husband 5 years ago. I'm not saying you should, I'm just saying you could. Whatever you choose it for yourself. That's all I ever really wanted for you. Loving you always from wherever I am, Eleanor. And then at the bottom in smaller script, P.S. I told you I'd always have the last word. I laugh. The sound surprises me, bursting out through the tears, but I can't help it. Even now, even in her final message from beyond the grave, Eleanor is still herself, loving, protective, and completely incapable of leaving without one last piece of advice. Martha Peterson. Of course she noticed. Of course she planned for that too. Ryan looks at me with concern, then understanding dawns as he sees my expression. What did she say? She told me to live. I say, folding the letter carefully. And she recommended a neighbor. 6 months later, summer has come to Riverside Park. The community barbecue fills the air with the smell of grilled meat and fresh-cut grass, with the sound of children laughing and old friends catching up. I sit at a picnic table near the water, watching the ducks glide across the surface, feeling something I'd almost forgotten how to feel: contentment. Ryan is here, standing by the food table with a woman I've met twice now, a kindergarten teacher named Sarah, kind-eyed and genuine, who laughs at his jokes and doesn't inventory his possessions when she thinks no one is looking. She's good for him. Real. The kind of person Eleanor would have approved of. Across the city, I know Vanessa exists in some diminished form. I glimpsed her once a few weeks ago, waiting alone at a bus stop, scrolling through a phone that seemed to hold no notifications worth reading. The BMW is long gone, along with her social standing, her marriage, her carefully constructed image. She's not destroyed. That was never the goal. She's simply ordinary now, anonymous, powerless, and that's justice enough. Is this seat taken? I look up. Martha Peterson stands beside my table, a plate of potato salad in her hands, silver hair catching the sunlight. She's wearing a blue sundress and a tentative smile. I think of Eleanor's letter, of her final request, of the permission she gave me to choose for myself. It's all yours, I say, and the smile I offer her is real. Not the patient endurance I wore for 3 years, but genuine warmth, genuine openness, genuine willingness to see what comes next. She sits, and we talk about small things: the weather, the food, the way the light looks on the water. And somewhere I'm certain Eleanor is watching, satisfied that she got the last word after all. Some lessons come too late for some people. But mine didn't. And Ryan's didn't. Eleanor didn't leave us money or property. She left us something better, a second chance to become the family she always believed we could be. That's not revenge. That's love, the kind that outlasts everything, even death. And that brings us to the end of Thomas's story. A story about patience that looked like weakness, but was actually strength. A story about a wife who loved her husband so much that she protected him even from beyond the grave. A story about a son who lost his way and found his path back, one kept promise at a time. But most importantly, this is a story about recognizing the signs before it's too late. Financial exploitation of elderly family members happens every day, often by the people closest to them. It hides behind words like family and sacrifice and shared expenses. It thrives in silence, in averted eyes, and the reluctance to ask uncomfortable questions. If you recognize something in Thomas's story, if you saw patterns that felt familiar, whether in your own life or in the life of someone you love, please know that patient doesn't mean powerless. Document what you see. Trust the people who have earned your trust, and remember that the truth reveals itself when you stop forcing it. Now I want to hear from you. What moment in this story hit you the hardest, was it Eleanor's video speaking to Thomas from beyond death? Was it Ryan finally standing up in that conference room? Or was it that final letter where Eleanor admitted her own fears and gave Thomas permission to live again? Drop your answer in the comments below if this story moved you. Please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Your support helps us continue bringing you stories that matter. Stories about justice, redemption, and the love that outlasts everything. Until next time, take care of each other.